So nowadays there's a rift between the bro science and the science-based lifters and the form Nazis and the ego lifters, and nobody really knows what direction to go. I'm gonna go ahead and settle this straight. Why I believe that form is extremely important, but not the end-all be-all. And I'm gonna give you reasons behind it, not just blatantly say it for the sake of saying it. And I'm gonna give you some tangible things that are going to allow you to improve your form, but also have a motivation and inspiration to do it, so that way you can ultimately get the most out of your training and your performance. So the three things that I wanna cover as to why form is important. Number one is gonna be leverage. Number two is going to be correct alignment and usage of the muscles that you're supposed to and trying to use in a specific movement. And then last but not least is functionality and injury prevention. So let's start with the first one. When it comes to leverage, what is leverage? Essentially, it is your ability, it's the body's ability to use its own weight or the weight of the setup of a machine to move a load more effectively. So think about it like this. If I do a bicep curl in free air, I have a lot less leverage, right, than if I were to place my arm under or put it on a preacher curl, because I can now have a more stable and controlled base that allows me to exert more force instead of now there's nothing that this force can push off of in the air, right, which makes it a lot harder. The reason why this is important is because what you're trying to do is move the most amount of load and keep as much tension on the muscles that you're trying to train. And this is for the purpose of building muscle, right? That's essentially what we're trying to do. Now, if we talk about stability, functionality, strength, and those sorts of things, having some other adaptations might be important. But for this specific conversation, we're talking about how to maximize the amount of muscle that we're building. We need to exert or have as much leverage as possible, which is why when you see all these stupid little one-arm movements over here, sure, again, you're building proprioception, you're building awareness, you're building neurological connection, you're building stability, etc. But you're not maximizing hypertrophy. If you think about it, the way to get the most amount of tension onto a muscle is the most fixed and controlled. So, for instance, like a machine is fixed, right? You can't adjust the movement pattern that the machine sets you in. So, in that position, it's not really leverage at that point. What would be leverage is how you actually sit or set yourself in that position. But essentially what I'm trying to say is the more fixed something is, the more leverage they have that you can exert onto the force and move it. So when we're talking about leverage in this context as well, it's setting yourself in the position where you can move the weight most effectively by using your own body weight or form. So like, again, it's hard in context to give you a pinpoint answer, but it's easy for me to give you analogies, right? Again, am I gonna have more leverage with my back on a pad when I do a tricep extension, right? Because I can push off of it, or is it gonna be freestanding? So we talked about leverage. You want the most amount of leverage as possible. The last thing that can affect leverage is absolutely your body weight as well. The more body weight you have, the more leverage that you have. So when people think they're getting stronger because they're getting bigger, yes, it's correlated, but it's not causative. You're not building more muscle because you're bigger. You just have more leverage that you can exert onto the force to move it and handle the force that the weight is putting onto you. So a little bit of physics there. So moving on to the second part, let's talk about how correct form puts your body in alignment and executes the same muscles. So we think about it this way, okay? If our hip and our spine, our knees, whatever joint is not aligned with how it needs to be correctly, you're not going to, again, have the right amount of leverage, right? But you're not going to be activating the muscles that are required to do that specific movement. Okay, so it's like, think about it like this, right? If I raise my sternum, depress my scapula, I'm going to use a lot more chest versus if I let my let my sternum fall, I'm going to use a lot more shoulder. Same movement, right? But that correct spinal positioning, that sternal alignment, so on and so forth, is going to allow you to put the muscles in the correct position to exert the most amount of leverage, like we talked about the first one, and the most amount of force, and keep the degree of tension on there. So what happens when you're ego lifting and you're moving, your spine, you're arcing more, you're doing all these things, you're taking things out of alignment and you're not utilizing the muscle in its most effective movement pattern, right, which is going to exert the most amount of force out of it, but also keep the most amount of tension on it. Remember, there is a balance between moving as much weight as you can, but then also the other side is having that weight placed exactly where you want it to go. Because again, if you think about that chest press example, your delts are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. You're going to see the numbers go up, but your chest is going to lag behind. I've had that problem before until I really dissected and had an assessment on how my movement patterns were and what muscles I was activating. And since then, I've had extreme and tremendous gains in the chest department, right? Because I started to put my body in the correct correct position to utilize those things. So again, the second point is form does matter in aligning the body in the correct position so that the muscles can track and receive tension and be put under tension in the most maximal and optimal place possible. Now, it might not mean that you move the most amount of weight, but it's the most amount of weight that you can move with the specific muscle that you're training. Last but not least, why is form important when it comes to functionality and ability? Because at the end of the day, the movement patterns that you do over and over and over, right? It's training that neurological connection. And by training that neurological connection, you're reinforcing how it should act when you're not thinking about it, right? So like if you think about it this way, I'll give the crappy chest press example, right? Excuse me for the Thailand motorcycles. If I let my sternum fall and let my shoulders cave over and I'm doing a chest press like this and that's all I know, what do you think is going to happen when I do a push-up for a fitness test for the military or the police, or I push someone off of me? That's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to exert the least amount of force, and that's how I get injured, right? Because you're putting these joints in a very compromised position. So when it comes to functionality, that's why full range of motion and also the correct movement patterns, even in fixed weight training, is extremely important, because you're training the muscle that when you're doing this specific movement, this is the muscles that should be activating in what position. So at the end of the day, knowing these three things, hopefully this reinforces your ability and desire to have correct form. Now you don't need to be perfect, right? There's not going to be a perfect, you're gonna have some little slips and cheats and stuff like that, but it's as close as you can get to high quality as you can before progressing, because you don't need to just be increasing the weight, you could be increasing the quality of the repetitions in order to progress. So hopefully you enjoy this information. Subscribe to this channel if you want more videos just like this. And if you want to know what it'd take for us to work one-on-one together, fill out the application, my link in my bio, and I'll reach out to you.